Have you ever held something so tightly that your hands began to ache, but the thought of letting go felt even more painful? Maybe it wasn't just your hands. Maybe it was your heart, a heart that kept hoping, kept waiting, kept believing that if you just loved a little harder, gave a little more, stayed a little longer, he would finally see you, finally choose you. But days turned into months, and silence became the loudest thing in the room. You started wondering if he ever truly heard you, or if you were just speaking to a wall built of fear, pride, and absence. There's a moment, soft but undeniable, when something shifts, when the ache of holding on becomes heavier than the fear of letting go. It doesn't come with fanfare. It doesn't ask permission. It arrives like a whisper inside your chest. Enough. That's all it says. And it's not about anger or revenge or proving anything. It's about finally hearing your own soul asking for peace. Louise Hay once said, "I let go of all fear and doubt, and life becomes simple and easy for me." And maybe that's the truth we resist the most, that life can become simple, but only after we release what complicates our hearts. There's a hidden desire, one we don't speak aloud, the hope that, even in leaving, he'll remember you, that your love will echo in his absence, that maybe, just maybe, your goodbye will make him realize what he lost. But that's still a tether. That's still waiting. That's still giving him the script to your worth. And darling, your value was never meant to be measured by someone else's realization, especially not by someone who only hears you when you're already gone. We often think holding on is love, that staying, sacrificing, persevering, even when it hurts, is proof of our devotion. But what if that's not love? What if that's fear dressed as loyalty? Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds us, to let go does not mean to stop loving. It means to start living. Letting go is not a betrayal of the heart. It's a return to yourself. It's an initiation, sacred, fierce, and silent, into the woman you were before the waiting began. Picture this, a balloon in your hand, bright, fragile, filled with dreams. You hold it tight because you're afraid it will fly away, afraid of losing it, afraid of being left empty. But the truth is, the tighter you hold it, the more it slips through your fingers. And when you finally let it go, you realize you weren't just releasing the balloon. You were releasing yourself from the skyless prison of someone else's indecision. The universe moves when you move, but only after you say, enough. And when you do, it listens. It responds, not always with noise, sometimes with stillness, sometimes with new paths, sometimes with the weight lifting from your chest in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. But it always answers, because when a woman chooses herself, deeply, clearly, and without apology, the entire universe bends to honor that truth. Letting go isn't the end. It's the opening, and this is just the beginning of your return to home, not the one built with someone else's bricks, but the one within you, the one you locked long ago when you made someone else the keeper of your light. Are you ready for what happens next? When the universe finally has space to respond? There's a silence that comes after letting go, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that holds space. A space where your own voice can finally be heard again. Maybe for years it was muffled beneath the noise of waiting, the endless inner dialogues, the justifications, the fantasies. You tried to read his silences like scripture, searched for meaning in every delay, every vague promise, every halfway gesture, and in doing so, you lost the sound of your own soul, whispering to you. But the moment you let go, truly let go, that voice begins to return, not as a shout, but as a soft remembering, a gentle echo of who you were before you began shrinking to fit inside someone else's absence. Louise Hay said, "I trust the process of life," and maybe that trust is exactly what was missing. Not trust in him, not trust in what could have been, but trust in the unfolding of your own path, even when it leads away from what you once begged for. That voice inside you, once silenced by compromise and longing, begins to grow stronger. It says things like, "I deserve peace." It says, "This isn't love if it costs me my self-respect." And eventually, it says, "I'm ready." But letting go is often misunderstood. It's not an act of rejection. It's not saying, "You were never enough." It's saying, "I'm no longer willing to be less than I am to make this work." It's not cold. It's courageous. It's not bitter. It's boundary. Releasing someone doesn't mean you never loved them. It means you've stopped abandoning yourself in the name of love. It means you've stopped calling self-betrayal loyalty. And when you make that choice, something deep begins to shift. It's subtle at first. A a little more breath in your lungs, a little less weight on your chest. But that shift is sacred, because it marks the moment you stop negotiating your worth. It marks the moment your healing becomes non-negotiable. You're not punishing him by letting go. You're honoring yourself. You're stepping into a deeper truth, that your love is not a lifeline for someone who keeps dropping it. It's a sanctuary, and not everyone is meant to enter. But what happens when the past keeps knocking? When he reaches out just when you've found your footing? That's what we'll talk about next. Because sometimes, letting go is only the first step in remembering why you had to. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when you realize you've been standing at a closed door for far too long. You knock, you wait, you press your ear against the silence, but nothing changes. The door remains shut, and you begin to feel the truth rise like a tide inside your chest. He's not coming, not because you weren't enough, but because this story was never meant to grow past its beginning. And the longer you stand there, the more you block what's trying to reach you from another path. The universe, gentle but firm, has its own way of intervening. It doesn't force you to move, but it rearranges the energy around you. The missed calls, the mixed signals, the gut feelings that whisper, "This isn't it." And still, we hold on, because letting go means facing the unknown. It means grieving not just him, but the future you imagined together. It means grieving the version of you that once believed this was love. But what if the closed door isn't a punishment? What if it's protection? What if that silence is the universe's way of clearing a space for what's truly aligned with your soul? You see, love cannot bloom where energy is trapped. And as long as you're anchored to what has ended, you're unavailable for what wants to begin. It's not about moving on quickly. It's about moving honestly, step by step, breath by breath, unbinding yourself from the story that kept you small. And then something strange happens. The more you let go, the lighter you feel. The more you release, the more space you create. Not just in your calendar or your bed, but in your mind, in your nervous system, in your heart. That tension in your chest softens. That loop in your thoughts slows down. And what enters that space is not immediately a new person, but a new awareness, a new you. Letting go isn't failure. It's faith. Faith in the process. Faith that your deepest peace will never require you to beg. And sometimes, that faith is tested right when you least expect it. Because just when you've started to find your ground again, he returns. Or at least his shadow does. But that's what we'll gently explore next. Why he pulls away, why he returns, and why it no longer holds the power it once did. It's one of the strangest twists in the emotional dance. The moment you let go, the moment you stop waiting, stop chasing, stop hoping, he reappears, maybe not with words of clarity, but with gestures that stir the ache again. A like on a photo, a late-night message, a "Hey, how've you been?" As if the silence between you never held 1,000 unsaid things. And for a split second, your heart stumbles. Because for so long, this is what you prayed for. A sign, a return, a chance. But now something's different. You've changed. You're no longer the woman who needs crumbs of affection to feel worthy. The truth is, his return isn't always about love. Often it's about energy. He feels the cord breaking. He feels your soul pulling back. And whether he understands it consciously or not, he senses the shift. But what you must remember, deeply and without shame, is that not every return is meant to be welcomed. Some come as tests. Some come as echoes. Some come simply because absence creates curiosity, not commitment. Louise Hay said, "I lovingly release the past and turn my attention to this new day." That's not just a phrase. That's a boundary, a declaration, a spiritual threshold. Because just as you begin to reclaim your peace, the past may come knocking. Not to honor your growth, but to measure if you'll abandon it for one more memory. And you've done that before. You've answered the message. You've softened again. You've made excuses for why maybe this time it'll be different. But the woman you're becoming doesn't negotiate with half love anymore. She doesn't mistake timing for truth. She doesn't reopen doors that led her into darkness. So even if he returns, it no longer matters. Because this story isn't about him. It's about you, your healing, your boundaries, your rebirth. Still, healing isn't linear, and letting go doesn't mean you won't feel. There's grief. There's longing. There's an entire identity that was once wrapped around being chosen by him. And as you say goodbye, again, and this time for real, there's a quiet breaking inside. But even in the breaking, something luminous begins. And that's where we'll go next. To the story of a woman who said goodbye, and in that goodbye, finally found herself. She didn't slam the door. She didn't make a scene. There were no dramatic final words or ultimatums. Just a quiet decision, made somewhere deep inside her. The kind of decision that changes everything. Not because it's loud, but because it's final. She had waited for years. Waited through silence. Waited through broken promises. Waited through the hope that someday he would turn around and say, "You were always the one." But one morning, as sunlight poured through her kitchen window, she felt something different. Not sadness, not anger, just stillness. And in that stillness, the whisper came again. Enough. She packed her things not because she hated him, but because she had remembered herself. She walked away not because she stopped loving, but because she started listening. Listening to the ache that had lived in her bones. Listening to the way her own laughter had grown rare. Listening to the quiet wisdom that said, "Love doesn't feel like this." On her way back to her own life, her own rhythm, her own breath, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt tender. She cried in grocery store parking lots. She missed him during rainy nights. But with every tear, she made room. With every ache, she made space. And slowly, life began to move again. Not fast, not flashy, but real. A new friend who truly listened. A book that spoke to her soul. A morning where she woke up and realized she didn't think about him first thing. Healing, she discovered, was not a finish line. It was a quiet unfolding, one moment at a time. And the woman who once measured her worth by his attention began to see herself through a new lens, not as someone who was left, but as someone who returned to her joy, returned to her intuition, returned to the sacred center of who she was before love became a battleground. But healing brings with it a different kind of storm, a storm that comes not from outside, but from within. Because when you say no more, the ground beneath your old self begins to shake. That's where we'll go next, into the internal earthquake that comes when you finally cut the cord. Because every ending shakes something loose, and sometimes what rises isn't more pain, but the truth you buried to survive. It doesn't always look dramatic, this internal earthquake. There are no visible cracks, no falling walls, but inside, everything shifts. When a woman finally says, "No more," when she truly cuts the cord, not just physically, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually, something collapses. The illusion, the hope, the part of her that kept bending just to be enough. It's not just the relationship that ends. It's the version of herself that believed she needed to stay to be whole. At first, it can feel disorienting, like standing in the aftermath of a quiet storm. You feel raw, unanchored. The routine you once hated is now gone, and even in its absence, there's an echo. You begin to notice the ways you had adapted, the ways you had silenced yourself, the way your body tightened every time you had to pretend that his distance didn't hurt, that his silence wasn't rejection, that your needs were too much. But as the dust settles, something else becomes visible. Beneath the rubble of what once was, there is space, there is breath, and there is truth. A truth that had been buried beneath years of emotional negotiation. Louise Hay reminds us, "I lovingly release the past and turn my attention to this new day." That release is not a single act. It's a process. Sometimes it's shaking. Sometimes it's sobbing into your pillow. Sometimes it's staring at a wall, wondering if you made the right decision. But with each passing moment, the truth becomes clearer. You didn't lose yourself when you let go. You found yourself underneath the ruins. This is the sacred tremor of healing, the collapse that clears the ground for something new. Not a new relationship, not a new distraction, but a new foundation, a new relationship with yourself, rooted not in the fear of being left, but in the faith that you were never truly alone. Still, in the silence that follows, many women confuse solitude with punishment, as if being alone is the price you pay for choosing yourself. But what if that solitude is sacred? What if that silence is not emptiness, but invitation? That's where we go next, into the spiritual reset that only solitude can bring. Because sometimes the universe speaks the loudest, when no one else is around. There's a quiet that comes after the breaking, not just silence from the world outside, but a stillness within. At first it feels unfamiliar, empty, as if life has gone mute. But this solitude, it's not punishment, it's not abandonment, it's a sacred pause, a spiritual reset. It's the moment life gives you back to yourself. For so long, your nervous system may have been wired for tension, waiting for the next message, decoding his moods, bracing for disappointment. Even in his presence, you felt alone. Even in conversations, you felt unseen. So now, as you sit in the quiet, the noise fades. Not because everything makes sense yet, but because your soul finally has space to speak, and what it says might surprise you. It says, "I've missed you." It says, "You were never hard to love, just unheard." And slowly, that solitude becomes less of an echo chamber and more of an altar, a place where you meet yourself again. You wake up and notice your breath. You make tea and savor it. You cry without shame. You laugh without needing approval. These aren't small things. They're sacred acts of remembrance, pieces of your spirit returning to the surface after years of being buried beneath performance, pain, and the pressure to keep proving you were lovable. The silence becomes your teacher. It shows you what you accepted just to avoid being alone. It reveals the compromises that chipped away at your self-worth. But it also shows you your strength. Not the strength that keeps holding on, but the strength that finally, lovingly, lets go. You begin to understand that solitude is not the absence of love. It's the foundation for real love, the kind that begins within and doesn't crumble when others leave. And from that solitude, something else rises. A vitality, a return of energy, a sense that your body is finally relaxing, your mind finally resting, your soul finally exhaling. That's what we'll explore next. How your physical and emotional body react when you stop clinging, and how healing begins not with someone arriving, but with you releasing what was never meant to stay. At first, it's subtle, almost unnoticeable, but then one morning, you wake up, and your chest doesn't feel as heavy. You sip your coffee and it tastes like more than routine. There's a lightness in your body, not because everything is fixed, but because something has been released. When you stop clinging, emotionally, spiritually, physically, your body begins to speak in ways it couldn't before. It starts to exhale. For months, maybe even years, your body carried the weight of emotional tension, the waiting, the wondering, the trying. Your shoulders bore the burden of being the one who cared more. Your stomach twisted with every unanswered message. Your sleep was shallow, your heart guarded, your smile strained. But once you let go, the energy begins to shift. It's not magic. It's biology. It's your nervous system moving out of fight or flight. It's your heart no longer bracing for what won't come. It's your body remembering what it feels like to be safe, not with someone else, but within yourself. This return of energy doesn't always feel like joy at first. Sometimes, it feels like fatigue, like a long, deep exhale after years of holding your breath. Your body is tired, not because you're broken, but because you've been surviving on tension. Now, healing begins. And healing isn't passive. It's cellular. It's emotional. It's spiritual. What once manifested as anxiety begins to dissolve. What once felt like a constant ache starts to ease. The fatigue gives way to clarity, and clarity gives way to possibility. You begin to move differently. You walk into rooms without shrinking. You hear your own thoughts without the background noise of doubt. You say no without guilt. You rest without shame. And this too is letting go, not just of him, but of the version of you that believed you had to earn your peace. Still, a question might linger. What if he never comes back? What if this really is the end? What if the closure is silence? These are real questions, tender questions, and the answer may not be what your heart once wanted to hear, but it might be the exact answer your soul has been waiting for, because sometimes the greatest gift is that he doesn't come back at all. There's a certain kind of ache that comes from absence, from realizing he's not coming back, not with words, not with actions, not with the recognition you longed for. At first it stings like rejection, like failure, like being forgotten. But over time, you begin to see that what once felt like abandonment was actually protection in disguise. His absence, painful as it was, created the space for your awakening. It forced you to stop outsourcing your worth. It pushed you to finally meet yourself, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who no longer needs to be. And that shift is sacred. Because when you stop trying to rewrite a story that was never meant to be yours, you begin to write something entirely new. A life that doesn't revolve around being remembered by him, but being restored to you. The silence that once pierced your heart becomes a form of peace. The longing that once drained your energy becomes a kind of clarity. You begin to notice how much energy you used to spend trying to be enough. Enough to change him. Enough to hold his attention. enough to be what he wasn't ready for. And when you finally stop, your power begins to return, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet power of presence, the deep knowing that your value was never diminished by someone's inability to see it, and you stop needing closure. Because you realize the closure isn't his explanation, it's your decision. The decision to close the door without bitterness, to release the fantasy, to bless what was, without needing it to continue. To understand that real love, true, reciprocal, honoring love, never leaves you guessing. So no, he doesn't come back. And in that space where his return used to haunt you, something else grows. Peace, wholeness, a softness you forgot you had, the kind that doesn't ache for validation, the kind that simply is. And in that stillness, the universe begins to respond, not because you begged, but because you let go. That's the quiet miracle. Not that he returns, but that you don't need him to. And the more you honor that truth, the more the universe rises to meet you, which leads us to what happens when a woman fully chooses herself, and how life begins to unfold when she no longer asks for permission to exist. When a woman chooses herself, not as a rebellion, not as a defense, but as a quiet, sacred act of truth, the universe pays attention. Something begins to shift, not because she demanded it, but because her energy is no longer scattered in 1,000 directions. She is gathered now, centered, grounded in her own presence, and the world responds to that. Opportunities start arriving. Conversations feel lighter. People look her in the eye. Not because life suddenly got easier, but because she stopped abandoning herself in the name of being chosen. There's a magnetism that forms around a woman who respects her own energy, who doesn't beg, who doesn't chase, who doesn't explain herself to those committed to misunderstanding her. Louise Hay said, "My life works beautifully, not perfectly, not painlessly, but beautifully." Because when you live in alignment with your worth, your life begins to mirror that truth. You start attracting people and situations that match your inner state. And when something doesn't, you no longer force it to fit. You let it fall away, with love, with clarity, with peace. This isn't about being invulnerable. This is about being real, being honest with your heart. It's about recognizing that you don't have to harden to protect yourself. You just have to stop abandoning yourself to be loved. Because the love that lasts, the love that heals, is the one that begins with you. And from that place, the universe opens. Not because you needed to be rescued, but because you rescued yourself. Not with grand gestures, but with quiet choices, with whispered no's, with mornings where you stood in front of the mirror and decided to be on your own side again. And now, you stand at a new threshold, one that leads not back to him, but forward to you, to a life where your peace is not up for negotiation, to a chapter where your soul is no longer silenced, to a version of you who doesn't settle, doesn't shrink, doesn't wait in emotional corners. This is the beginning of everything. And in the final few moments, we'll return to where this all began, to the letting go, not as loss, but as the sacred return to your own heart. She thought she lost him. That letting go meant losing something sacred. But what she didn't see at first was that she had just recovered her power, not the kind that needs to be loud or proven, but the kind that moves like a river beneath her skin, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that simply is rooted, unwavering, whole. Louise Hay once said, "I am in the process of positive change. Not instant change, not perfect change, but a process. And that process begins the moment you stop tying your worth to someone else's ability to stay. The moment you look at the closed door and choose not to knock anymore. The moment you whisper to yourself, 'I deserve more.' That's when the universe responds. Not with noise, not always with signs, but with stillness, with alignment, with a life that no longer tastes like compromise. And you begin to see what Clarissa Pinkola Estes meant when she said, 'Go out and let stories happen to you, and you will live them.' Because the moment you stop trying to rewrite the old one, a new story begins. One that doesn't start with heartbreak, one that doesn't end with someone else's absence, one that unfolds in the mirror, in the morning silence, in the brave choice to be whole before being held. You find a key inside yourself, not the one that unlocks his return, but the one that opens the door to your own house, the one you boarded up long ago, thinking you needed to leave yourself behind to be loved. That key has always been yours. You just forgot where you placed it, but now it's in your hand. And as you turn it, the door opens, not to him, but to you. You didn't let go to punish him. You let go to find your way back home. And the universe responded, not with chaos, not with confusion, but with clarity, with space, with freedom, with a path that leads you back to your own sacred center. So if this message touched something inside you, something raw, something real, know this: you're not alone. You're part of a silent sisterhood of women who chose themselves after years of choosing someone else. And every time one of us chooses peace over pain, the world becomes a little more whole. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. Let this space be your quiet reminder that you're never too late to come home to yourself. And if your heart wants more, if your soul is ready for the next step, click on the video waiting for you here on the screen. It's the next chapter in your healing, and it's calling you.